So I'm here on Valentine's Day weekend to talk to you all about love. However, the truth is, I don't feel very loving these days. Now, don't get me wrong. I love being here with all of you. I love my husband, Rob, and my family and friends. But I have to be honest, I have been struggling with feelings of love toward politicians, billionaires, and the news media since the November election. And things have only gotten worse in the last month or so. It's really hard to love people who say they are saving the country money and doing all sorts of radical surgery on the government, and at the same time, according to reports, haven't actually saved any money at all. Meanwhile, causing harm, chaos, and fear. And yet, and here I'll take a deep breath and compose myself, I'm well aware that love is at the center of our Unitarian Universalist values. And I'm not going to go around singing, instead of love will guide us, something like hate will guide me. I don't think that's the approach, or that love inside me will lead the way, that I should serenade to you with the anger inside me. I don't think that that would work at all. No, if we turn toward hate and anger, that will only lead to more destruction. Even though getting my anger out might help me feel a little bit better, at least for a short while. No, in fact, that's how I know that love is a spiritual discipline, because I have to choose it, even when I'd rather not. Kind of like going to the gym. I almost never want to go, but I adhere to the discipline because I know it will be good for me in the long run. You know what helps to follow and maintain a discipline? Having a buddy, or a group, or a community to do it with. We are part of such a community with deep and ancient roots. Unitarians and Universalists come from Christian roots with theology based on Jewish and Christian scriptures. Today, as a pluralistic faith, we draw on many wisdom traditions, but as white Christian nationalists try to shove their hurtful version, their destructive version of Christianity down our throats, let's just take a look at a few of the actual Hebrew and Christian scriptures that call us into love. Of course, the first commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Even though we might have varying beliefs and feelings about this version of God, we can read the first commandment as centering on love, our focus on the love we have for the things that are of ultimate importance to us. And if you're wondering how the Bible tells us to treat immigrants, it's very clear. It commands us to love the stranger. In Leviticus, Scripture says, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Also in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, Moses tells his people, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against any of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself." If you ever went to a Christian Sunday school, you may recall that when the Pharisees were trying to trick Jesus into saying something blasphemous, he responded with that first commandment, and then he added, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And then an expert in Jewish law tried to test Jesus further and asked him, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus famously answered with the story of the Good Samaritan. But let's take a little bit of a look and see who the Samaritans were. According to a Catholic website, because of their imperfect adherence to Judaism and their partly pagan ancestry, the Samaritans were despised by ordinary Jews and were considered blasphemous by Orthodox priests. Jews who were traveling from Judea to Galilee, or vice versa, would cross over the River Jordan to bypass Samaria and then cross over again when they neared their destination. In other words, Jesus picked a group of people you would not only cross the street to avoid, but people to make absolutely sure you wouldn't encounter them, you would cross the river into an entirely different territory. So here is Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed over to the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Look after him." We are told to go and do likewise. That is what love looks like. Even to people we have been told to despise, to people we would do anything to avoid, to people who do not believe or think the way we do. Ouch. That is a tall order. In all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus quotes the Jewish law as the basis of loving our neighbors. And in Paul's letters to the Corinthians, the concept of love is famously defined. It says, "Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." All this is to say that love, though it may encompass that fluttery feeling we get when we initially connect with someone, and it's so much more, that kind of love is wonderful, but it is not sufficient. I don't have to have fond feelings for someone to show that I care for their humanity and treat them with respect while simultaneously speaking truth and protecting the vulnerable. All these examples sound to me like love is a transcendent value. What is that? Connie Goodbread, a Unitarian Universalist congregational consultant, says a transcendent value is an aspirational concept. It means we're always trying to move toward it. And adds that love is a great example. It is larger than any one individual. It is infinite. It is inspiring, awesome, breathtaking, difficult to practice, complicated, and needed in the world. Love holds us together. Love moves us forward. Love motivates us to fulfill the other UU values that we share, such as generosity, pluralism, justice, and equity. And as such, it thereby transforms us. I know a young man who holds some pretty radical political beliefs. He volunteers for the Democratic Socialists of America, and he doesn't think either major political party is doing enough to help people on the margins of society or the poor. He and I were having a political conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I expected him to say something angry or derogatory about the Republicans and the Democrats. But instead, he said, as we move toward repairing our political divide, I hope we can center love. People are really suffering out there. I was brought up short. Those few words boosted my spirit and helped me. He gave me an instant attitude adjustment and helped me take a more positive approach. So what does love look like in public? Throughout our human history, houses of worship have been regarded as protected spaces for persons who entered them for sanctuary. For years, including during the first Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security restricted any immigration enforcement in or near places of worship. But on January 20th, 2025, the day Trump was inaugurated for his second term, a Department of Homeland Security memo rescinded the sensitive locations protection for houses of worship, as well as for schools and hospitals. Dozens of religious organizations, including the Baptists, conservative, Reform, and Reconstructionist Jewish associations, Episcopalians, Evangelicals, Mennonites, Quakers, Pentecostals, Presbyterians, and Unitarian Universalists responded with a major lawsuit. The suit is called Mennonite Church, USA, versus the United States Department of Homeland Security. It was filed in the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. Unitarian Universalist Association Executive Vice President Carrie McDonald said, as Unitarian Universalists, fighting for justice and liberation for all people is at the heart of our faith tradition, which recognizes the spark of the divine inherent in every person. Our sacred spaces must continue to offer sanctuary to those who face oppression, violence, or alienation, including immigrant communities. The complaint states that the plaintiffs bring this suit unified on a fundamental belief: every human being, regardless of birthplace, is a child of God, worthy of dignity, care, and love. Welcoming the stranger or immigrant is thus a central precept of their faith practices. Love welcomes. Love protects. Love hopes. Love perseveres. There's a phrase used in UU circles that says that we are held by a love that will not let us go. When I was researching that phrase, a love that will not let us go, I found it in the works of James Luther Adams. And I remembered a story of his formative experiences as a 26-year-old seminary student studying in Germany 6 years after Hitler became head of the Nazi movement, but it would be another 6 years before the party came into power. For context, Adams, a Unitarian Universalist minister, was a preeminent theologian and social ethicist of the 20th century. He went on to become a professor at Boston University, the University of Chicago, Andover Newton Theological School, Meadville Theological School, and Harvard University. Of his time in Germany, he wrote, "I visited Nuremberg just at the time when thousands of people, young and old, were in the city for the annual Nazi festival. On the day of the Great Parade, in the streets of Nuremberg, history, as it was being made at that juncture, gave me personally a traumatic jolt, and I would say a near miss." He said, "I asked a bystander the meaning of the swastika that was everywhere evident. Within a few minutes, I found myself in a heated conversation with more and more people joining in, particularly when the discussion turned to the Jewish question. I was suddenly seized by the elbow from behind and pulled vehemently out of the crowd. I immediately thought I was being taken into custody. I could not see who it was. After extricating me from the crowd, he marched me vigorously down a street and then turned up into an alley. Don't you know that when you're watching a parade in Germany today, you either keep your mouth shut or you get your head bashed in? Don't be frightened. I have saved you." He was studying, that is, Adams was studying at the persecuted confessional seminary in Elberfeld. It occupied an abandoned Masonic building. The order was forbidden to hold meetings there. Repeatedly, he said, I heard anti-Nazis say, if only 1,000 of us in the late 20s had combined in heroic resistance, we could have stopped Hitler. I noticed the stubborn resistance of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I observed also the lack of religious pluralism in a country that had no significant nonconformist movement. We're the nonconformists in the churches. Gradually, I came to the conviction that a decisive institution of the viable democratic society is the voluntary association as a medium for the assumption of civic responsibility. The result was that I was plunged into voluntary associational activity concerning myself with race relations, civil liberties, housing problems. In other words, a voluntary association, exactly the type of work and organization we Unitarian Universalists form. We are a voluntary association, and we try to accomplish together those forms of justice. Love forms community and respects the inherent worthiness and dignity of all. So on this Valentine's weekend, we are talking about LOVE, because we Unitarian Universalists have resolved to align our words and actions around the value of love. Love serves as the driving force behind our pursuit for a more just and loving world for all people. For us, love is not just an emotion, but a practice that encourages action toward positive change. This is love of country and democracy and the belief that the church has a critical role to play in sustaining and preserving a just, equitable, and caring social order. This is love as an act of resistance against deportation and discrimination and hate. And how do we do that? James Lucier Adams says we do that by forming community, telling our stories, having those stories move us in powerful ways, and by hewing tightly to our values, by ensuring that those values move us to live our lives with greater integrity and with solidarity with each other. This personal solidarity then translates to social solidarity that can stem the tide of authoritarianism. In short, we must be a community, and a community that has love at its center. We must form relationships and groups that are willing to be listened, to be kind, generous, supportive, communities that recognize our interdependence. And then we can form the backbone of a pluralistic society, one that is both just and equitable. And so I call on each of us to put love in the center of our lives, love in the center of this beloved community, and join the resistance.